Eyes down.
A five-star restaurant in Charlotte. A black waitress holds out the wine list. A white lawyer slaps it off her hand. It hits the marble floor.
$500 million on the line? And they send $1 billion on the line and hand a cockroach to pour my Cabernet?
Sir, I'm just your server. This.
Flies don't talk, flies don't think. Flies get swatted, so shut it!
Don't touch it, honey. Don't touch it, honey. You don't know where it's been.
Pick up the menu, wipe it off. Open that mouth again, you'll crawl out the same way you
40 guests watched. Nobody breathed. But this waitress, the one he just called a cockroach, reached for a napkin on her tray. And a pen. One note. That note killed his $500 million deal, exposed a federal crime, and ended everything he spent 30 years building. 72 hours earlier, SEC Field Office, Charlotte, North Carolina. A windowless room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The air smelled like burnt coffee and dry erase markers. Photos of Grant Whitfield were pinned across a whiteboard. Courtroom shots, charity galas, handshake photo ops with senators. Underneath each photo, red lines connected to shell companies, offshore accounts, and doctored financial filings. Director Paul Archer stood at the head of the table. 60 years old, gray hair buzzed short. The kind of man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. 18 months, he said. 18 months we've been building this case, and we still can't nail him. He tapped the whiteboard, the name at the center. Grant Whitfield, senior managing partner at Whitfield Caldwell and Associates, one of the most powerful corporate lawyers in the Southeast. This Thursday night, Whitfield is hosting a private dinner at the Sterling Room. He's closing a $500 million acquisition. Linden Ridge Capital's biotech division sold to Emerson Hartwell Pharmaceuticals. Our intel says the deal is built on fraud, altered environmental reports, buried EPA violations, $85 million in hidden liability, scrubbed clean from the data room. Archer paused. He looked around the table. The problem is, everything we have is circumstantial. We need him on tape, his own voice, his own words, admitting what he did. He clicked to the next slide. A photo of the Sterling Room. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, leather booths. That's where she comes in. Every head in the room turned to the woman sitting at the far end of the table. Brielle Turner, 32 years old, JD from Howard University. 6 years in the SEC's Division of Enforcement, specializing in corporate fraud. 2 undercover operations already on her record, both successful, both resulting in federal convictions. She didn't smile, she didn't wave, she just looked at the whiteboard and nodded once. Archer continued. Brielle will go in as a waitress. Whitfield has a pattern. He treats service staff like they're invisible, especially black women. He'll talk freely because in his mind she doesn't exist. He slid a folder across the table. The restaurant manager, Nadine Cole, is cooperating. She'll place Brielle on the floor for the VIP section. Brielle wears a wire, a micro recorder sewn into the apron. The audio won't be courtroom clean, but it gives us ears inside. Archer locked eyes with Brielle. Your job, get close, stay invisible, let him talk. The moment you have a confirmed admission, you signal us. Brielle opened the folder. Floor plans, seating charts, guest list. She scanned every page like she was reading a contract, because to her, it was one. What's the signal? She asked. Write it down. Anything. A napkin, a receipt, doesn't matter. Nadine will relay it to us. The moment I get that signal, Agent Bradshaw's FBI team moves in. Brielle closed the folder. I'll be ready. The night before the operation. Brielle's apartment. Small, clean, quiet. Her SEC badge sat on the dresser next to her keys. On the kitchen counter, a pressed white shirt and a black apron. The uniform of a Sterling Room server. She stood in front of the mirror practicing, holding a tray, pouring from a bottle, getting the posture right. Shoulders soft, chin slightly down, eyes neutral. Not too proud, not too broken, just invisible enough. She'd done undercover work before, but this one was different. This one required her to stand still while a man tore her apart and not react, not flinch, not blink. She picked up her phone and called her mother. Hey, Mama. Baby girl, you sound tired. Long shift tomorrow, that's all. Be careful. Always am. She hung up, set the phone down, looked at the apron hanging on the door. Then she ironed it, the same way she ironed her blazer before court appearances. Crisp, precise, ready. Thursday evening, the Sterling Room. The restaurant hummed with quiet luxury, jazz trickling through hidden speakers, the smell of seared butter and rosemary drifting from the kitchen, champagne flutes catching the light. Brielle arrived through the staff entrance at 5:15. Nadine was waiting. "You good?" Nadine asked. "I'm good." VIP section, table 9, party of 6. He's expected at 7. Brielle clipped her apron on. The micro recorder sat snug against her ribs. She couldn't feel it unless she pressed her arm tight to her side. 2 blocks away, Director Archer sat in the back of an unmarked van, headphones on, monitors glowing. Agent Connie Bradshaw and a 5-person FBI arrest team were staged in a parking garage around the corner. Engines off, radios on. Archer's voice crackled through Nadine's earpiece. "We're live! Clock starts now!" At 7:02, a black town car pulled up to the Sterling Room. Grant Whitfield stepped out. Tom Ford suit, gold cufflinks. His wife Carolyn on his arm. Blonde, diamond earrings, a smile that never quite reached her eyes. He walked past the hostess without a glance. "Whitfield, private room." 4 minutes later, Douglas Emerson arrived. 62, silver-haired, quiet. He thanked the hostess by name. He shook the coat check attendant's hand. 2 men walking into the same dinner. One demanded the room. The other earned it. Brielle watched from behind the service station. She adjusted her apron, took a slow breath, and walked toward table 9. Brielle approached table 9 with the wine list tucked under her arm. 6 place settings, crystal stemware, a single orchid in the center. Grant was already talking before she reached the table. Loud, commanding, telling Douglas Emerson about a golf trip with a federal judge. Carolyn nodded along like every word was scripture. Brielle stopped at Grant's left shoulder. "Good evening. My name is Brielle and I'll be—" "Nobody asked your name." Grant didn't look up. He was straightening his cufflinks. "Bring the Screaming Eagle, 2012, if you even know what that is." Brielle kept her voice level. "Of course, sir. Excellent choice. Would you also like me to—" "I'd like you to stop talking and start walking, that's what I'd like." Carolyn tilted her head. "She's eager, I'll give her that." She said it the way someone talks about a puppy that peed on the rug. Brielle turned and walked to the wine cellar. Steady steps, quiet shoes on marble. Behind her, she heard Grant mutter to the table, "Unbelievable. $100 service charge, and this is what they trot out?" In the service corridor, Brielle paused. Just for 1 second. She pressed her arm against her rib cage. The micro recorder was running. Good. She pulled the Screaming Eagle from the rack, checked the vintage, and walked back out. She presented the bottle, label facing Grant. "Your 2012 Screaming Eagle, sir." He didn't acknowledge her. He was mid-sentence. Something about a congressman who owed him a favor. Brielle stood there. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. Holding a $4,000 bottle of wine while this man pretended she was a coat rack. Finally, he flicked his wrist. A lazy wave. Pour. She uncorked it, poured a taste into his glass. Perfect angle, not a single drop on the tablecloth. Grant swirled it, sipped, made a face. "It's off." It wasn't off. Brielle knew it wasn't off. A 2012 Screaming Eagle stored at proper temperature doesn't go off. But this wasn't about wine. This was about power. "I'm sorry, sir. Would you like me to bring a different—" "I'd like you to use whatever brain cells God gave you and figure it out yourself. Can you do that? Or do I need to draw pictures?" Douglas Emerson set his water glass down. Gently, deliberately. "The wine is fine, Grant. Pour me a glass, please." He looked directly at Brielle. A small nod. Grant snorted. "You're too generous, Douglas. Trust me. You give an inch, they take the whole damn table." Brielle poured for Douglas. Their eyes met for half a second. His expression said something she couldn't quite read. Not pity, something closer to recognition. She moved around the table, pouring for the remaining guests. A junior associate, mid-30s, nervous, staring at his phone. A corporate accountant who avoided eye contact. And Carolyn, who covered her glass with her palm. "Not from her hand," Carolyn said. "I'll pour my own." The first course arrived. Pan-seared scallops with truffle foam. Brielle served each plate from the left exactly as trained. Grant cut into a scallop, chewed once, and pushed the plate toward Brielle without looking up. "Rubbery, send it back." The kitchen had seared those scallops at 600 degrees for exactly 90 seconds. They were perfect. But Brielle picked up the plate. "Of course, sir. I'll have the kitchen prepare a fresh... And tell whoever's back there that if the main course is this sloppy, I'm calling the owner personally." Brielle carried the plate back to the kitchen. The head chef looked at the untouched scallops, one bite missing, and shook his head. He didn't say anything. He'd seen this before, just not usually this bad. When Brielle returned with a new plate, Grant was telling a story about a black clerk at his firm who couldn't even format a brief properly. "I gave the kid a chance," Grant said, spreading butter on a roll. 6 weeks. Couldn't cut it. They never can. It's not their fault. They're just not built for this level. The junior associate laughed nervously. Douglas didn't. Brielle set the new plate down. Grant glanced at it, then at her. "Your hands." Brielle paused. "Sir? Your hands are too close to my food. Step back." She stepped back. Exactly 1 foot. The distance between professionalism and humiliation. And Grant was dragging her across that line inch by inch. She'd been trained for this. 6 years of SEC fieldwork, 2 prior undercover operations. She'd sat across from men who laundered billions and smiled while they lied to her face. But those men had at least pretended she was human. Grant wasn't pretending anything. The main course came and went. Wagyu strip steak for Grant. Chilean sea bass for Douglas. Each plate served in silence. Brielle moved like a ghost, present enough to serve, absent enough to disappear. But she wasn't disappearing. She was listening. Between the main course and dessert, Grant excused himself from the table. "Client call, 2 minutes." He stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked to the far corner of the private dining room. Not the hallway, not outside, just 10 feet from the table, because the waitress didn't matter, and the walls had no ears. He was wrong about both. Brielle was clearing the bread plates, 3 feet away, close enough to hear his breathing. Grant's voice was low, but the room was quiet. Every word traveled. "The Linden Ridge numbers are locked. Yeah, the Carolina plant is handled. I pulled the DEQ filings from the data room myself. 3 EPA violations. 85 million in potential liability. No, Emerson's people won't find it. They're not looking that deep because I told them there's nothing to find." Brielle's hands kept moving, stacking plates, folding napkins. Her face showed nothing, but her mind was on fire. He just said it, out loud, on tape. He personally removed the environmental violation reports from the disclosure package. He concealed $85 million in liability from the buyer. And he did it deliberately, knowing that if Douglas Emerson's team ever saw the real numbers, the deal would collapse. This was securities fraud, wire fraud, falsification of material disclosures, and he'd just confessed it 3 feet from a federal investigator wearing a wire. But Brielle needed him to say it again, louder, clearer. The apron mic was low fidelity, enough for the surveillance team to hear fragments, not enough for a courtroom. She needed the dinner table confession, the one witnesses could corroborate. Grant hung up the phone, straightened his tie, turned back toward the table. He saw Brielle standing there, plates in hand, eyes down. For 1 second, something flickered across his face. Not suspicion, irritation, like noticing a smudge on a window. "The hell are you still doing here? I said clear the table, not plant roots." "Just finishing up, sir." "Then finish. And don't hover near me like that again. It's creepy." He sat back down, picked up his bourbon, and turned to Douglas Emerson with a smile so wide it could sell anything. "So, Douglas, let's talk about closing this thing tomorrow." Douglas looked at him. then at Brielle, who was walking away with a stack of plates, then back at Grant. "Let's," Douglas said quietly. Brielle disappeared through the service door. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were perfectly still. She had the phone call on tape. Now she needed the table confession. And she had a feeling Grant Whitfield, 3 bourbons deep and drunk on his own ego, was about to give it to her. 3 bourbons turned into 4. 4 turned into something looser, something careless. Grant Whitfield was glowing. The deal was closing tomorrow. $12 million in legal fees, the biggest payday of his career. He leaned back in his chair, arm draped over the leather booth, holding court like a king at his own coronation. Brielle returned to serve the dessert course, chocolate soufflé with gold leaf. She moved quietly, setting each plate with surgical precision. Grant didn't even wait for her to finish. "You know what kills me about this city?" he said, swirling his bourbon. "You walk into a place like this, $200 steaks, $4,000 wine, and they still can't keep the roaches out." He looked directly at Brielle when he said it. Not a glance, a stare. The junior associate shifted in his seat. Douglas Emerson's jaw tightened. Carolyn examined her nails like she hadn't heard a thing. Brielle placed the last plate. "Will there be anything else, sir?" "Yeah, some self-awareness. You're hovering again." She stepped back, 1 foot, then 2. The distance she'd been measuring all night, the exact space between doing her job and keeping her cover intact. Grant turned to his junior associate and dropped his voice, but not enough, not nearly enough. "You want to know why this deal is bulletproof?" The associate leaned in. "The due diligence?" Grant laughed. Not a chuckle, a full, chest-deep laugh. "Due diligence, that's cute." He took a long sip. "Let me tell you something about due diligence. It only works if both sides are looking at the same documents. And right now, Emerson's team is looking at a very, very clean version of reality." Brielle was refilling water glasses. 2 feet away, her back half turned to the table. Every muscle in her body was still, but her ears were wide open. The associate frowned. "What do you mean, clean version?" Grant leaned in. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial hum, the kind of voice men use when they think they're being clever instead of criminal. "The Linden Ridge Environmental Report, the Carolina plant. You remember those EPA filings? 3 open violations, $85 million in projected cleanup costs." "Yeah, I remember. That was the red flag in the—" "Was." Grant held up a finger. "Was the red flag, past tense. I pulled them, personally. Scrubbed the DEQ case numbers from the data room. Emerson's people ran their review last month. Clean as a whistle, because they only saw what I wanted them to see." He grinned, the kind of grin that belongs on a man who thinks he's untouchable. $500 million, and the only person who knows where the bodies are buried is sitting right here. He tapped his own chest. "Me." The associate stared at him. "Grant, that's how you close a $500 million deal. Take notes." Brielle set the water pitcher down. Her hands didn't shake. Her face didn't change. But inside, every synapse was firing. He said it, at the table, in front of witnesses. He admitted to personally altering the disclosure documents, removing material environmental liabilities, and deceiving the acquiring company's due diligence team. This wasn't a fragment caught on a phone call. This was a full, detailed, voluntary confession, delivered at a dinner table 3 feet from a federal investigator. The phone call was evidence. This was the kill shot. She needed to signal Archer. Now! Brielle stepped through the service door. The kitchen noise hit her, clanging pans, the hiss of steam, a sous chef barking orders. She moved past all of it to the service station at the end of the corridor. Nadine was there, polishing glassware, but her eyes were already locked on Brielle. Brielle didn't speak at first. She reached for a cloth napkin from the stack on the counter. Then she took a pen from the bartender's cup, a cheap ballpoint, the kind that comes in a box of 50. She unfolded the napkin on the stainless steel counter, and she wrote. Not fast, not sloppy, controlled. Every letter deliberate, the way she used to write case briefs at Howard. Confirmed. Subject admitted at table to altering Linden Ridge environmental disclosures. Carolina plant. 3 EPA violations removed. $85 million liability concealed. Data room controlled by subject. Witnesses present. On tape. Green light. She folded the napkin once, then twice, and placed it on the counter in front of Nadine. Nadine picked it up without a word. She walked to the back office, closed the door. 30 seconds later, Nadine's phone screen lit up. A photo of the napkin, sent to Director Archer's encrypted line. In the unmarked van 2 blocks away, Archer's phone buzzed. He opened the image, read it once, read it twice. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second, then opened them. He picked up the radio. His voice was flat, calm. The voice of a man who'd been waiting 18 months for this exact moment. All units, we are green. I repeat, green light. Execute on my mark. Hold for subject to exit the building. In the parking garage around the corner, Agent Connie Bradshaw heard the call. She looked at her 5-person FBI arrest team. Every one of them already had their vests on. You heard him. We move when Whitfield hits the sidewalk. Engines stayed off. Radios stayed on. The trap was set. Back in the dining room, Brielle returned with a fresh pot of coffee. Same posture, same neutral face, same invisible presence. But everything had changed. The clock was running. Grant was louder now. Bourbon number 5. He raised his glass across the table. To tomorrow, Douglas. $500 million. The biggest deal this firm has ever closed. Douglas picked up his glass, slowly. He held it in the air for a moment, then touched it lightly to Grant's. To tomorrow, Douglas said, but his voice was quieter than before. His eyes lingered on Grant a beat too long. Grant didn't notice. He never noticed anything that wasn't about him. Outside, 3 black SUVs rolled silently into position on the street. No sirens, no lights, just tinted windows and federal plates. 2 agents from Bradshaw's team were already inside the restaurant, seated at a table near the bar. Dressed like a couple on a date night, sharing a tiramisu, splitting a bottle of Pinot Grigio. The woman laughed at something the man said. To anyone watching, they were in love. In reality, they each had a sidearm under the table and an earpiece buried beneath their hair. Archer's voice came through. All units in position. Hold. Let him walk out on his own. Back at table 9, Grant snapped his fingers. Again. Hey, girl. Brielle walked over. He held up his bourbon glass, a tiny splash left at the bottom. He tilted it toward her, the amber liquid catching the candlelight. Spill. Right there. He pointed at a spot on the tablecloth. Clean it. Brielle looked at the glass, at the tablecloth, at Grant. Of course, sir. She took a fresh napkin, dabbed the spot, careful, precise. The same hands that had just written the note that would destroy him. Grant watched her with a smirk. He leaned toward Carolyn. See? Trainable. Carolyn laughed. The junior associate stared at his phone. Douglas said nothing. He just watched Brielle's hands, steady, unhurried, completely in control. Brielle straightened up, and for the first time all evening she looked Grant directly in the eyes. 1 second, maybe 2. Her expression was perfectly neutral. No anger, no fear, no satisfaction. Just clarity, like she was looking at something she'd already finished with. Grant's smirk faded. Just a fraction. Something about that look unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. A cold breeze through an open window he didn't remember leaving up. Then Brielle turned and walked away. Grant shook it off, took a breath, laughed at himself. But the narrator knows what he doesn't. That look was Brielle Turner saying goodbye. Dinner ended the way it always did for Grant Whitfield, with him talking and everyone else waiting for permission to leave. He signed the check. $1,400. He left 0 tip, wrote a note on the receipt instead. Service was beneath this establishment. The junior associate gathered the folders. Carolyn reapplied her lipstick. Douglas buttoned his jacket slowly, quietly, the way a man moves when he already knows something no one else at the table has figured out yet. Grant clapped Douglas on the shoulder. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., my office. We sign, we shake, and we make history. Douglas looked at him, a long, unreadable look. "Good night, Grant." They walked through the restaurant, past the bar, past the couple sharing tiramisu, the ones with federal badges under the table, past the hostess stand, through the front door. The Charlotte night air hit them, warm, humid, the smell of magnolia and asphalt. Grant stood on the sidewalk adjusting his cufflinks. Carolyn was 2 steps behind, scrolling her phone. The junior associate fumbled with the valet ticket. And then the headlights came on. 3 black SUVs parked across the street. All 3 lit up at the same moment, high beams cutting through the dark like a blade. Doors opened. Not fast, not slow, deliberate. 6 agents stepped out. Navy windbreakers, yellow letters across the chest. FBI. Agent Connie Bradshaw walked forward. Mid-40s, broad shoulders, flat expression. She moved the way people move when they've done this 100 times and never once enjoyed it. "Grant Whitfield?" Grant squinted against the headlights. "What is this? Do you know who I'm Agent Bradshaw, Federal Bureau of Investigation." She held up her credentials. Badge catching the light. "You're under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice." The street went silent. Even the cicadas stopped. "You're joking." Grant looked around, searching for someone to confirm this was a mistake. No one moved. "This is insane. I'm calling my lawyer right now." "Sir, you are a lawyer, and you have the right to remain silent. I'd recommend using it. Turn around, hands behind your back." Carolyn screamed. Not a word, just a sound, high-pitched, raw. She grabbed Grant's arm. An agent stepped forward, gently guiding her aside. She fought it for a second. Then she just stood there, mouth open, mascara already running. Grant's hands were placed behind his back. The handcuffs clicked. 2 small sounds that echoed louder than anything he'd said all night. They pressed him against the hood of the SUV, his Tom Ford suit against black metal. His gold cufflinks scraped the paint. Behind the restaurant's front windows, every guest in the dining room was watching. Phones were out, screens glowing in the dark like a wall of tiny witnesses. Someone was already filming. 20 minutes later, the scene was secured. Grant was in the back of an SUV. Carolyn was sitting on a bench, shaking, a female agent beside her. A second vehicle pulled up. Unmarked sedan. Director Paul Archer stepped out. Dark coat, no expression. He walked past the FBI team without a word and entered the Sterling room through the front door. Inside, the restaurant was frozen. Guests whispered. Servers huddled near the kitchen. The jazz had stopped playing and nobody had thought to turn it back on. Archer walked straight to the back office. Brielle was inside, standing in front of a small mirror. She had already removed the apron. Nadine stood beside her holding a garment bag. Brielle unzipped it. Inside, a charcoal blazer, a white blouse, her SEC credentials on a lanyard, her federal badge. She changed in under 2 minutes. When she walked out of that back office, she was not the same woman who had walked in 5 hours earlier. The apron was gone. The white server's shirt was gone. In their place, a fitted blazer, pressed blouse, and a badge clipped to her belt that read, U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, Senior Investigator. She walked through the restaurant, past the kitchen, past the service corridor where she'd folded that napkin, past the bar, past the table where the undercover couple was already packing up. The servers she'd worked beside all evening stared. The hostess, the one Grant had ignored on his way in, covered her mouth with both hands. A line cook standing in the kitchen doorway whispered, "Oh my God." Brielle didn't stop. She didn't explain. She walked through the front door and into the warm Charlotte night. Director Archer was waiting outside. He extended his hand. "Outstanding work, Turner." She shook it. One firm squeeze. "Thank you, sir." Cameras were flashing now. A local news van had already pulled up. Someone inside the restaurant had called the press. Brielle didn't look at the cameras. She didn't need to. The FBI vehicle carrying Grant pulled away from the curb. It rolled slowly past the front of the Sterling room, past the camera crews, past the gawking crowd, and past Brielle Turner, standing on the sidewalk, badge on her belt, lanyard around her neck, hands at her sides. Grant saw her through the window. Not in an apron, not carrying a tray, not with her eyes down. She was standing tall, blazer sharp, badge catching the streetlight. Their eyes met. Grant's mouth opened. His lips moved, but no sound came out. His face cycled through 5 emotions in 2 seconds: confusion, disbelief, recognition, horror, and finally, something that looked a lot like understanding. The woman he called a cockroach. The woman he told to shut her mouth. The woman he snapped at like a dog, made clean his spill, and called trainable. She was a federal investigator, and she had recorded every single word. Brielle's expression didn't change. Same face she'd worn all night. Neutral, calm, unreadable. But now he knew what that face meant. The SUV turned the corner. The taillights disappeared. Brielle took a slow breath. The first real breath she'd taken in 5 hours. And she didn't look back. 11:14 p.m. FBI Charlotte Field Office. Interview Room B. Grant Whitfield sat behind a metal table bolted to the floor. The Tom Ford suit was wrinkled now. The gold cufflinks had been confiscated along with his watch, his phone, and his belt. The fluorescent light above him buzzed, the same cheap hum as 1,000 other interrogation rooms in 1,000 other federal buildings across the country. He looked smaller in here. The leather booth and crystal stemware were gone. The $4,000 wine was gone. The snapping fingers and the loud voice, and the man who made a black woman clean his spill for sport. All of it stripped down to a middle-aged man in a wrinkled suit sitting under a buzzing light. His attorney arrived within the hour. Craig Forster, senior partner at a white shoe defense firm in Raleigh. Gray suit, expensive briefcase, the kind of calm that costs $800 an hour. Forster sat down, reviewed the file the FBI had placed on the table. He read for 6 minutes without speaking. Then he closed the folder. Grant. It's a misunderstanding. The numbers were... Grant. Forster's voice was quiet, final. They have you on tape, your own voice, 2 separate recordings, a phone call and a dinner table conversation. You admitted to pulling the DEQ filings from the data room. You admitted to concealing $85 million in environmental liability. You said, and I quote from the transcript, "The only person who knows where the bodies are buried is me." Grant stared at him. They also have your emails. A thread dated 6 weeks before the dinner. You wrote to your associate, "Scrub the DEQ stuff. Emerson doesn't need to see it. Just make it clean." Forster closed his briefcase, slowly. I can negotiate, but you need to understand what you're facing. Securities fraud carries up to 20 years. Wire fraud, another 20. Obstruction, 10. These are federal charges, Grant. There is no county judge you can golf with to make this go away. Grant put his head in his hands. The gold watch tan line on his wrist was the only proof he'd ever worn one. Who was she? He whispered. Forster paused. The waitress? She wasn't a waitress. No, she wasn't. Her name is Brielle Turner. Senior Investigator, SEC Division of Enforcement, Howard University Law, 6 years federal service. She was assigned to your case 8 months ago. Grant didn't move. He just stared at the table, the same way Brielle had stared at her tray all night. Eyes down. Except now, for him, there was nowhere else to look. The next morning, 8:15 a.m., Douglas Emerson sat in his corner office on the 32nd floor of Emerson Hartwell's headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows, Charlotte skyline, a cup of black coffee going cold on his desk. 2 SEC agents sat across from him. They laid it out, the altered environmental reports, the buried EPA violations, the $85 million in concealed liability. Every number, every document, every lie Grant had told to push this deal to closing. Douglas listened without interrupting. When they finished, he asked one question. How close were we to signing? 12 hours, sir. Douglas nodded. He picked up his phone and called his general counsel. Kill the deal, all of it, effective immediately. $500 million. Dead. Grant's $12 million fee, gone. 14 months of negotiations, due diligence, board approvals, incinerated by one sentence on a napkin. By noon, Emerson Hartwell released a public statement. Our company was the target of a deliberate and calculated fraud. We are cooperating fully with federal authorities and are grateful the deception was uncovered before any documents were signed. Douglas also ordered an independent audit of every past transaction Grant's firm had ever touched on Emerson Hartwell's behalf. Every deal, every filing, every decimal point. The dominoes fell fast after that. The North Carolina State Bar opened a formal ethics investigation within 48 hours. Grant's license was suspended immediately, pending full review. Whitfield, Caldwell and Associates released a statement before the end of the week. Mr. Whitfield acted independently and without the knowledge or authorization of the firm's partners. It was a lie. The SEC already knew it was a lie, but it was the kind of lie firms tell when the building is on fire and they're looking for the exit. Grant's clients didn't wait for the investigation to finish. 4 major corporate retainers pulled their business within 5 days. A pharmaceutical company in Raleigh, a real estate developer in Charleston, a private equity group in Atlanta, a banking conglomerate in Richmond. One by one, they sent the same polite, devastating email. We are terminating our engagement effective immediately. His portrait was removed from the firm's lobby wall on a Wednesday afternoon. A maintenance worker took it down with a stepladder while the receptionist pretended not to watch. The nail hole stayed in the wall for 3 days before someone thought to patch it. His country club revoked his membership. His law school alumni association quietly removed his name from their donor wall. The invitations stopped. The phone calls stopped. The lunches, the golf games, the handshake deals. All of it evaporated like steam off a Charlotte sidewalk in August. And Carolyn. She moved into her sister's house that same week, took 2 suitcases and the dog, left the diamond earrings on the kitchen counter. She retained a divorce attorney within 48 hours. Nobody, not one single person from Grant Whitfield's entire life, showed up to defend him. The story didn't break, it detonated. Within 24 hours, every major news outlet in the country was running it. Not buried on page 6, not tucked into a legal brief roundup. Front page, lead story, above the fold. The headlines wrote themselves. Top lawyer arrested after calling black waitress a cockroach. She was an undercover fed. She served his dinner, then she served him justice. The napkin that killed a $500 million deal. Cable news ran the story on a loop. Legal analysts dissected it frame by frame. Former federal prosecutors called it one of the most spectacular undercover operations in SEC enforcement history. A retired FBI director said on live television, "I've been in this business for 35 years. I've never seen someone hand-deliver their own confession to a federal agent and not even know it." But it was the footage that set the internet on fire. The Sterling Room, with the restaurant's full cooperation, released the security camera recordings from that night. Grainy, black and white, no audio. But you didn't need audio. The images told the story by themselves. Grant slapping the wine list out of Brielle's hand. Grant snapping his fingers in her face. Grant pointing at the tablecloth and making her kneel to clean his spill. Brielle standing perfectly still through all of it. Hands steady, back straight, eyes down. 28 million views in 4 days. The clip of Grant leaning across the table, mouth open, finger jabbing the air, became the defining image. It was screenshotted, memed, printed on protest signs. A street artist in Brooklyn painted a 30-foot mural of Brielle holding a napkin with the words, "Flies get swatted," crossed out and replaced with, "Flies fight back." The hashtags came next. Hashtag napkin justice trended nationally for 9 straight days. Hashtag eyes down became a rallying cry, not just against workplace racism, but against every man in every room who ever assumed the quiet one in the corner wasn't listening. Brielle did not give interviews. SEC policy prohibited it during an active prosecution. But her silence made the story bigger. The public didn't need her words. They had the footage, the napkin, and the mugshot of a man who used to snap his fingers at the help. Grant's mugshot circulated everywhere. Bags under his eyes, jaw slack. The Tom Ford suit replaced in the public imagination by an orange jumpsuit he hadn't even put on yet. Carolyn deleted all her social media accounts within 72 hours. It didn't help. Someone had already archived every photo, the charity galas, the country club brunches, the vacation selfies in Turks and Caicos. The internet doesn't forget. It just bookmarks. 8 months later, federal courthouse, Charlotte, North Carolina. The courtroom was full, every seat taken, press in the gallery, sketch artists in the front row, a line of people outside the building who couldn't get in, holding signs, holding phones, holding their breath. The prosecution built its case like a brick wall, one piece at a time. No gaps, no daylight. First, the recording. Brielle's wire had captured two separate admissions. The phone call in the corner of the dining room and the dinner table confession. Grant's own voice, bourbon loose and bragging, telling his junior associate exactly how he'd buried the EPA violations and controlled the data room. The courtroom heard every word. Grant sat at the defense table with his eyes closed. Second, the emails. A 6-week thread in which Grant personally instructed his team to remove the DEQ filings. His exact words, typed from his own laptop, "Scrub the DEQ stuff. Emerson doesn't need to see it. Just make it clean." The jury read it on a projection screen 10 feet wide. Third, the junior associate. He took the stand with shaking hands and a cracking voice. He described the pressure Grant put on him, the late-night calls, the threats. He told me if I didn't make the changes, I'd never work in law again. So I made them. Fourth, Douglas Emerson. He testified quietly, precisely. He described how close his company had come to signing a deal built on fabricated documents. His voice cracked once when he talked about what would have happened to his shareholders if the fraud had gone through. "We trusted him," Douglas said. "That was our mistake. But it shouldn't have been a mistake to trust your own attorney." Fifth, the expert witnesses. Environmental engineers who quantified the $85 million in hidden liability. Financial analysts who mapped the cascading damage the fraud would have caused. Each one laid another brick in the wall. And then, Brielle. She took the stand in a navy blue suit, SEC badge visible on her belt. Her posture was the same as it had been that night at the Sterling Room, straight, still, composed. But this time she wasn't holding a tray. She recounted the evening from beginning to end. Every insult, every slur, every snap of the fingers. She described the moment Grant called her a cockroach, the moment he told her flies get swatted, the moment he made her clean his spill and called her trainable. The courtroom was dead silent. A woman in the gallery was crying. The prosecutor asked, "Why didn't you break cover? After everything he said to you, why didn't you respond?" Brielle paused. Not for drama, for precision. "Because the mission was bigger than his words. I've been underestimated my entire life. He wasn't the first. He won't be the last. But he will be the one people remember." Grant's defense attorney stood for cross-examination. He buttoned his jacket, cleared his throat. "Miss Turner, isn't it possible that you targeted my client out of personal offense? That his comments provoked a vendetta rather than a legitimate investigation?" Brielle didn't blink. "I was assigned to this case 8 months before that dinner. Your client was under federal investigation long before he decided to insult me. His racism didn't start the investigation." She paused. "But it did make him careless enough to confess in front of the woman who was recording him." The defense attorney sat down. He didn't ask another question. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 12 minutes. Guilty. All counts. Securities fraud, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, falsification of material financial disclosures. The sentencing hearing was held 2 weeks later. Same courtroom, same crowd, same sketch artists. Grant stood before Judge Anita Lawson. He wore a dark suit that didn't fit right anymore. He'd lost weight. His skin was gray. His eyes were hollow. He looked like a man who'd been living inside his own mugshot for 8 months. Judge Lawson looked at him for a long time before she spoke. Mr. Whitfield, you stood in the most privileged rooms in this country. You held degrees, titles, and the trust of clients who believed you were protecting their interests. And you used every one of those privileges to steal, to deceive, to conceal, and to demean. She paused. You looked at a woman doing her job, doing it with more grace and discipline than you demonstrated all evening, and you called her a cockroach. You told her she was furniture. You told her that her kind don't get to talk at your table. The courtroom was silent. That woman turned out to be one of the most capable federal investigators in this district. But that's not the point. The point is, it shouldn't have mattered who she was. No one deserves to be spoken to that way. Not a waitress, not an investigator, not anyone. She straightened the papers in front of her. 18 years in federal prison, $6.2 million in fines, permanent disbarment from the practice of law in all 50 states, forfeiture of all assets tied to fraudulent fees. The gavel came down, one sharp crack that echoed through the room like a gunshot. Grant was led away in handcuffs. His attorney stood alone at the defense table. Carolyn was not in the courtroom. No one from his former firm was present. No colleagues, no golf buddies, no senators, not a single person. Outside, the sun was setting over Charlotte. The courthouse steps were packed. Cameras, reporters, microphones, a wall of noise and light. Brielle walked out through the front doors, Director Archer beside her. Douglas Emerson waiting at the bottom of the steps. Douglas shook her hand. Firm. Both hands. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The crowd began to clap, slowly at first, then louder. A wave that rolled through the steps and down the sidewalk and across the street. Brielle nodded once, a small, quiet acknowledgement. Then she walked to a waiting car, got in, closed the door. She didn't wave, she didn't pose, she didn't celebrate. She just breathed. 4 months after the verdict, Brielle Turner sat in a corner office on the 9th floor of the SEC's Charlotte Regional Headquarters. New desk, new nameplate, new title, Assistant Director, Division of Enforcement. The youngest person to hold that position. The first black woman. Ever. Her Howard Law degree hung on the wall. Same frame she'd once hung in a studio apartment while eating ramen and applying to firms that never called back. And on her desk, in a glass shadow box, sat a cloth napkin, white linen, blue ink, her handwriting. The napkin that killed a $500 million deal and ended a 30-year career. She didn't frame it to brag, she framed it to remember. Her first act as assistant director, a new task force targeting fraud in corporate acquisitions. She built the team herself, recruited from Howard, from Spelman, from public universities and community colleges. If you've ever been invisible in a room full of powerful people, she told them during orientation, then you already have the most important skill an investigator can have. You know how to listen when no one thinks you're listening. She gave the commencement address at Howard University School of Law that spring. She didn't talk about Grant. She didn't talk about the napkin or the headlines. She talked about the bus ride. When I was 25, I rode the bus to my waitressing job. I'd review case law on my phone in the back seat. Nobody knew I'd just passed the bar. Nobody cared. She paused. There will be rooms where people decide you don't belong before you open your mouth. Walk in anyway, sit down, and bring your credentials. Because the moment they stop watching you is the moment you have all the power. The auditorium stood. She still visits the Sterling Room on Friday nights. Walks through the front door now. The hostess knows her name. Nadine joins her sometimes. Corner table. Napa Valley Cabernet. They don't talk about the case much. They talk about their mothers, bad first dates, whether the souffle is better than last year. Grant Whitfield reported to Federal Correctional Institution, Butner, North Carolina on a Tuesday morning. White transport van. No Tom Ford suit. No gold cufflinks. Whitfield, Caldwell, and Associates dissolved 3 months later. 3 additional partner indictments followed. The lobby where Grant's portrait once hung became a co-working space by spring. Carolyn finalized the divorce, sold the house, kept the dog. left Charlotte for good. Grant's name now appears in law school ethics textbooks nationwide. Case study number 44, arrogance, fraud, and the cost of underestimating others. He'll be eligible for parole in 2040. Brielle didn't fight back with anger. She didn't flip the table. She absorbed every insult, every snap of the fingers, every word designed to make her feel less than human. And she turned it into evidence. His arrogance became a confession. His cruelty became testimony. A cloth napkin became the most expensive note Grant Whitfield ever ignored. Your circumstances don't define your power. Your uniform doesn't define your worth. The moment someone decides you're invisible, that's the moment you become the most dangerous person in the room. So let me ask you, have you ever been somewhere and someone underestimated you so completely that they had no idea who they were dealing with? Drop your story in the comments. I want to hear every single one. If this hit you, share it. Someone needs to hear it today. Subscribe, tap the bell. I'll catch you in the next one. And remember, never underestimate the quiet ones, especially the ones wearing a wire.
"18 years behind bars, a $500 million deal, debt, all because he called the wrong woman a cockroach. You know what's right? Grant Whitfield didn't lose everything because the FBI outsmarted him. He lost everything because he couldn't see the person standing right in front of him. That's what arrogance does. It blinds you. It turns people into furniture, into background noise, and when you stop seeing people, you stop being careful around them. Brielle didn't need to fight back. She didn't need to raise her voice. She just stood there, absorbed every insult, every slur, and turned his cruelty into a federal case. One napkin, 47 words, a 30-year career gone. His ego wasn't just his weakness, it was her weapon. And this made me think, how many times have we walked past someone and already decided who they are? How many people have looked at us and decided we don't matter? What if the person you dismiss today is the one who changes everything tomorrow? Tell me, when was a time someone underestimated you so badly they had no idea who they were really dealing with? Drop it in the comments. If this story hit you, share it. Someone needs to hear it today. Subscribe, hit the bell, and remember, never underestimate the quiet ones, especially the ones taking notes.